The luxury and opulence of the mall seemed impossible for those who didn't belong to that world. When a simple-looking woman walked into one of the most exclusive stores, judgmental glances appeared instantly. Humiliated and thrown out by the store owner himself, she carried with her not just the pain but a purpose. Years later, fate would bring them together again. But this time, she was the one who had the power to decide his future. Sarah Martinez stood before the gleaming glass doors of Luxe and Elite, the most prestigious boutique in the Highland Mall, her heart racing with anticipation. The reflection that greeted her wasn't that of their usual clientele. No designer handbag, no perfectly coiffed hair, no $1,000 outfit. Instead, she saw a woman in simple business attire, her dark hair neatly pulled back, clutching a small envelope containing her entire month's savings. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast prismatic patterns across marble floors, and the air was heavy with expensive perfume. Each display case housed items that cost more than her monthly rent, but Sarah wasn't there to browse. She had spent weeks planning this moment, saving every penny from her administrative assistant job to buy her sister Elena the perfect graduation gift, a delicate silver bracelet she had spotted in the window during her lunch breaks. As she stepped inside, the shift in atmosphere was immediate. Conversations hushed and heads turned. A group of well-dressed women near the jewelry counter exchanged knowing glances, their whispers barely concealed behind manicured hands. The sales associates, who had been eagerly attending to other customers, suddenly became intensely focused on reorganizing already perfect displays. "Can I help you?" The voice was sharp, dripping with barely concealed disdain. Richard Sterling, the boutique's owner, approached her with measured steps. His tailored suit and perfectly styled silver hair exuded authority, but it was his eyes, cold and calculating, that made Sarah's confidence waver. "Yes, I'm interested in the silver bracelet in the window display," Sarah managed, her voice steadier than she felt. Sterling's lip curled slightly. "That piece is part of our exclusive collection. The price point starts at $5,000. "I know. I've been saving for it." Sarah reached for the envelope in her purse, but Sterling's dismissive laugh stopped her. "Listen," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "this isn't some department store where you can window shop all day. We have a certain caliber of clientele to maintain." His voice grew harder with each word. "I suggest you find somewhere more appropriate for your budget." The humiliation burned through Sarah like acid. Every eye in the store was on her, some customers barely concealing their amusement, others looking away in second-hand embarrassment. A young sales associate had her phone subtly pointed in their direction, recording the encounter. "I have the money," Sarah protested, but Sterling was already gesturing toward the door. "Security," he called out, though no guard had appeared. "Please escort this woman out. And in the future," he added, his voice dripping with contempt, "let's avoid wasting everyone's time." Sarah's vision blurred with unshed tears as she turned and fled the store. The sound of muffled laughter followed her through the mall's corridors, past the luxury storefronts that now seemed to mock her very presence. By the time she reached her car, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip her keys. That evening, as she sat in her modest apartment, the full weight of the day's humiliation crashed over her. Her phone buzzed incessantly. The video had gone viral. Comments ranged from cruel jokes to debates about class and privilege, her personal humiliation now fodder for social media entertainment. The next morning, her boss called her into the office. Margaret Henderson, CEO of Henderson Financial, wore an expression of carefully crafted concern. "Sarah, you've been an excellent assistant, but this situation has created unwanted attention for our firm. Our clients expect discretion and sophistication. I'm afraid we'll have to let you go." In the span of 24 hours, Sarah's world had crumbled. But as she packed up her desk, something shifted inside her. The tears that had flowed freely yesterday dried up, replaced by a steely determination. Richard Sterling's smirking face and the echo of his words became etched in her memory, not as a reminder of her humiliation, but as fuel for what would come next. That night, as she sat at her small kitchen table, Sarah opened her laptop and began to research business courses, investment strategies, market trends. The bracelet she had wanted to buy her sister would have to wait. She had a different investment to make now, in herself. The path ahead would be long and difficult, but Sarah Martinez was about to embark on a journey that would transform not just her circumstances, but her entire reality. 5 years had passed since that fateful day at Highland Mall, and Sarah Martinez was no longer the same woman who had fled from Lux and Elite in tears. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had been a careful, calculated metamorphosis that touched every aspect of her life. The first year had been the hardest. After losing her job at Henderson Financial, Sarah had taken whatever work she could find, often juggling 3 part-time positions while attending night classes in business administration. Her tiny apartment had become a command center of sorts, its walls covered with charts, business plans, and inspirational quotes. Every spare dollar went into her education and her carefully crafted plan for the future. Sarah's sister Eleanor had wanted to defer her graduate studies to help, but Sarah wouldn't hear of it. "This isn't about a bracelet anymore," she had told Elena during one of their late-night phone calls. "This is about proving that success isn't determined by where you start, but by how smart you work to get where you want to be." By her second year, Sarah had earned her business degree and landed a junior position at a small but innovative restaurant management company. She absorbed everything she could about the industry, from kitchen operations to customer psychology, from supply chain management to marketing strategies. Her natural attention to detail and ability to anticipate needs, honed during her years as an assistant, proved invaluable. "You have an eye for this business," her mentor, James Chen, had told her one evening as they reviewed plans for a new venue. "You see opportunities where others see obstacles." The praise had meant more coming from James, a self-made restaurateur who had built his own empire from a single food truck. Sarah's breakthrough came in her third year when she identified an untapped market niche, luxury dining experiences that were both exclusive and inclusive. Her proposal to James was simple but revolutionary: create high-end restaurants that maintained the quality and atmosphere of fine dining while eliminating the pretension and elitism that often accompanied it. "The wealthy will come for the exclusivity," she had explained, "but we'll attract a whole new demographic of customers who appreciate quality but have felt unwelcome in traditional luxury establishments." The knowing look in her eyes told James there was more to her insight than mere market analysis. James had not only approved her proposal, but had made her project leader. Under Sarah's guidance, their first venture, Essence, became an overnight sensation. The restaurant combined modernist cuisine with a warm, unpretentious atmosphere. Critics raved about the innovative menu, but it was the impeccable service and welcoming environment that truly set it apart. Now at 32, Sarah had risen to become the executive director of operations for the entire Chen restaurant group. Her office, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, was a far cry from the cramped cubicle she had once occupied. But the view wasn't what gave her satisfaction. It was knowing that she had earned every square inch of this space through determination and hard work. Her personal transformation had been equally dramatic. Gone was the timid woman in off-the-rack business attire. Sarah now moved with quiet confidence, her wardrobe carefully curated to project success without ostentation. She had learned the rules of the high-end world not to fit in, but to reshape them on her own terms. "For you've created something special here," James said one evening, as they watched the dinner service at their newest location. "But I get the feeling you're not done yet." Sarah smiled, her fingers absently touching the simple silver pendant at her neck, a graduation gift she had finally been able to buy for herself. "There's still more to do," she replied, her mind already working on her next move. What James didn't know was that Sarah had been quietly making preparations for her own venture. She had spent years studying the luxury retail market, analyzing its weaknesses, and developing a business model that would challenge its fundamental assumptions about exclusivity and worth. As she drove home that evening, Sarah passed Highland Mall. The sight of Lux and Elite's illuminated storefront no longer filled her with dread or anger. Instead, she felt a calm sense of purpose. Richard Sterling's empire was showing signs of strain. Whispers of financial troubles and declining sales had been circulating in business circles. The market was changing, and Sterling's old-world approach to luxury retail was becoming increasingly outdated. Sarah pulled into her parking garage, her mind already mapping out the next phase of her plan. The bitter memories of that day had been transformed into something far more powerful. A vision for change that would shake the foundations of the luxury retail world. And unknown to Richard Sterling, the woman he had once humiliated was about to become his biggest nightmare. Richard Sterling stood at the window of his private office, gazing down at the Highland Mall's main concourse with the same imperious expression he'd worn for the past 2 decades. But behind that carefully maintained facade, worry lines had begun to etch themselves deeper into his face. The latest sales reports lay scattered across his mahogany desk, each page telling the same story. Luxe and Elite was losing ground. "It's the economy," he muttered to himself, the same explanation he'd been giving his board members. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. The luxury market was evolving, and for the first time in his career, Sterling felt out of step with the changes. His assistant, Marcus, entered the office with his usual tentative demeanor. "Mr. Sterling, the quarterly. Numbers from accounting." He placed another folder on the desk, his expression carefully neutral. "More bad news?" Sterling's voice carried an edge that made Marcus flinch. "The decline in foot traffic has accelerated, and we've lost 3 more regular clients to the Augustine collection. The competing boutique had opened 6 months ago, on the other side of town, and its impact had been immediate and devastating." Sterling dismissed Marcus with a wave, his irritation masking a growing sense of unease. The Augustine collection represented everything he despised about modern luxury retail. Their philosophy of accessible elegance seemed like an oxymoron to him, yet their success was undeniable. He picked up a magazine from his desk. Business, Innovation Quarterly. The cover story featured a series of profiles on emerging business leaders. His eyes skimmed past headlines about tech startups and sustainable fashion until a particular phrase caught his attention. Redefining luxury. The rise of inclusive excellence. The article detailed the success of the Chen Restaurant Group's revolutionary approach to high-end dining. Sterling would have normally ignored such news, but one detail made him pause. The executive credited with this transformation was a woman named Sarah Martinez. Something about the name tugged at his memory, but he couldn't place it. His phone buzzed. Another message from his bank about the latest loan payment. Sterling's personal finances had taken a hit along with his business. The divorce had been expensive, and his ex-wife's lawyer had been ruthlessly effective at protecting her interests. His remaining assets were tied up in the store, and those were worth less with each passing month. "Mr. Sterling?" Marcus appeared again. "The board members are requesting an emergency meeting. They're concerned about the direction of the company." Sterling straightened his tie, a gesture that had become almost compulsive lately. "Tell them I'm preparing a comprehensive turnaround strategy." The lie felt bitter on his tongue. He had no strategy, no plan to combat the changing market. His only hope was that his reputation and connections would somehow pull him through. That evening, as he walked through his store, Sterling noticed something he'd been avoiding for months. The displays that had once seemed the epitome of luxury now appeared dated and cold. Young professionals with obvious wealth walked past without a second glance, their attention caught by stores with more modern approaches to luxury. At home, his normally impressive penthouse felt emptier than usual. The art pieces and antiques that had once represented his success now seemed like relics of a passing era. He poured himself a drink and opened his laptop, finally forcing himself to look at the competition more closely. The Augustine Collection's website was everything Luxe and Elite's wasn't: elegant yet inviting, exclusive yet accessible. Their customer testimonials spoke of feeling valued rather than just validated. Their social media showed people from various backgrounds enjoying luxury experiences without pretense. Sterling's cursor hovered over their About page, where a familiar name appeared among the leadership team. Sarah Martinez was listed as a strategic advisor to the Augustine Collection, alongside her role at the Chen Restaurant Group. This time, the name triggered a distant memory. But before he could grasp it, his phone rang. It was his biggest supplier, calling to discuss payment terms. The conversation was brief but devastating. They were reducing his credit line and demanding faster payment on outstanding invoices. As he hung up, Sterling realized that the carefully constructed facade of his business was beginning to crack. He spent the rest of the night reviewing old financial records, looking for any assets he could liquidate. His search revealed an uncomfortable truth. He had been living on borrowed time and borrowed money for longer than he cared to admit. The market changes hadn't caused his problems. They had merely exposed the weaknesses in his business model. As dawn approached, Sterling finally allowed himself to face the reality he'd been avoiding. Lux and Elite, like its owner, was becoming obsolete. The world of luxury retail had changed, and he had failed to change with it. The question was no longer if his empire would fall, but when, and what would be left when it did. The Augustine Collection's grand opening gala was the kind of event that would have once been Richard Sterling's natural habitat. The converted warehouse space had been transformed into a showcase of modern luxury, with its industrial elements softened by elegant lighting and artistic displays. Sarah Martinez stood near the entrance, greeting guests with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly how far she'd come. "The response has been overwhelming," Elizabeth Augustine, the boutique's owner and Sarah's business partner, whispered between greeting guests. "Your vision for this place was exactly right." Sarah smiled, watching the diverse crowd of attendees mingling comfortably among the high-end displays. Young tech entrepreneurs chatted with old money socialites, while fashion bloggers and traditional business leaders found common ground over glasses of champagne. This was exactly what she had envisioned, a space where luxury wasn't about exclusion, but about appreciation. Ms. Martinez, a young reporter from Style and Commerce magazine, approached with a notebook in hand. "Would you mind commenting on how your experience in the restaurant industry influenced this venture?" "Luxury isn't just about the product," Sarah replied, choosing her words carefully. "It's about creating an experience that makes people feel valued. Whether it's a meal or a handbag, the principle is the same. Quality shouldn't come with condescension." The reporter nodded eagerly. "And your partnership with the Augustine Collection? It's quite a departure from traditional luxury retail." "Sometimes the greatest innovations come from questioning traditional approaches," Sarah said, her mind briefly flickering to that day at Lux and Elite. "We believe that true luxury can be exclusive in quality without being exclusionary in attitude." Across town, Richard Sterling sat in his darkened office, scrolling through social media coverage of the gala. Each post, each glowing review, felt like another nail in his coffin. His own store had been almost empty that day, the few customers who did come in leaving without making purchases. His phone buzzed with a message from his bank. Another automatic payment had been declined. Sterling rubbed his temples, trying to ward off the headache that had become his constant companion. The stack of unpaid bills on his desk had grown, and his remaining credit lines were nearly maxed out. Back at the gala, Sarah was discussing future plans with potential investors when she overheard a conversation that caught her attention. "Did you hear about Lux and Elite?" one guest asked another. "Apparently they're struggling to keep their supplier contracts. My cousin works in distribution, says Sterling's credit is shot." Sarah excused herself and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. The news about Sterling's troubles didn't bring her the satisfaction she might have expected years ago. Instead, she felt a complex mix of emotions she couldn't quite name. "Everything okay?" Elizabeth approached, handing her a glass of water. "Just thinking about how things change," Sarah replied. 5 years ago, I couldn't have imagined being here." Elizabeth nodded knowingly. She had heard Sarah's story during their first meeting, when Sarah had pitched her vision for a new kind of luxury retail experience. "You've created something remarkable here, and this is just the beginning." The gala continued into the night, but Sarah's mind was already on the next phase of her plan. The Augustine Collection was more than just a successful business venture. It was proof that her vision could work on a larger scale. In his office, Sterling finally forced himself to look at his company's latest valuation. The numbers confirmed his worst fears. Lux and Elite's worth had plummeted. His hands shook as he closed the report. The empire he had spent decades building was crumbling, and he had no idea how to stop it. The next morning, Sarah sat in her office at the Chen restaurant group, reviewing proposals for expansion. The Augustine collection's success had exceeded even her optimistic projections, and investors were eager to back her next ventures. But as she looked through the papers, her attention was drawn to a news alert on her phone. Lux and Elite was reportedly preparing for major restructuring. Sarah leaned back in her chair, remembering the day that had set all of this in motion. She had transformed that humiliation into motivation, that rejection into innovation. Now, as she stood at the precipice of even greater success, she realized that her journey wasn't about revenge. It was about changing the very system that had once tried to exclude her. The board meeting at Lux and Elite had the atmosphere of a funeral. Richard Sterling sat at the head of the table, his usual commanding presence diminished by the gravity of the situation. The quarterly reports projected on the screen behind him told a story of rapid decline, sales down 60%, foot traffic at historic lows, and mounting debt. "Our options are limited," Gloria Chen, the head of finance, stated flatly. "We either find a buyer willing to take on our debt, or we begin liquidation proceedings." Her words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Sterling gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. "There must be other alternatives. Our brand still has value." "The brand is the problem," interjected Michael Ross, the youngest board member. "Modern luxury consumers want something different. Look at the Augustine collection. They're redefining the entire market." The mention of his rising competitor made Sterling's jaw clench. Their approach dilutes what true luxury means. It's a temporary trend. "A trend that's bankrupting us," Gloria countered. "Mr. Sterling, we need to face reality. The market has changed, and we haven't changed with it." Meanwhile, across town, Sarah sat in a sleek conference room at the Augustine collection, reviewing expansion plans with Elizabeth and their executive team. The success of their first location had attracted attention from investors worldwide. "Dubai wants us to open a flagship store in the fashion district," Elizabeth announced, spreading out the proposal. "And we have similar offers from London and Paris." Sarah studied the documents, but her mind was elsewhere. She had seen the news about Lux and Elite's troubles. The store's impending collapse should have felt like vindication, but instead it sparked an idea. "What if we considered a different kind of expansion?" she asked suddenly. "One that could change more than just our bottom line." Back at Lux and Elite, Sterling sat alone in his office after the board meeting, staring at his reflection in the window. His phone buzzed with messages from creditors, but he ignored them. The board had given him 1 week to find a solution before they moved forward with liquidation. His computer dinged with an email notification. Opening it, he found a message from an unexpected source, the Augustine collection. They were interested in discussing a potential business opportunity. Sterling's first instinct was to delete the message. But as he reached for the mouse, his eyes caught sight of the signature. Line Sarah Martinez, Chief Strategy Officer. The name tugged at his memory again, stronger this time, but still frustratingly out of reach. That evening, Sarah walked through the quiet halls of her office building, considering the bold move she was about to make. The plan she had developed went beyond business strategy. It was about creating real change in an industry that had long thrived on exclusion. "Are you sure about this?" Elizabeth had asked earlier when Sarah shared her idea. "After everything that happened?" Sarah's response had been simple. Sometimes the best way to change a system is from within. She picked up her phone and dialed the number she'd obtained from her contacts. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered, older, more strained, but still carrying that note of authority. "Mr. Sterling, this is Sarah Martinez from the Augustine collection. I believe it's time we met to discuss the future of luxury retail." There was a pause on the line, heavy with unspoken history. Sterling cleared his throat. "Yes, of course. Though I must admit I'm surprised by your interest in Lux and Elite. The landscape of luxury is changing, Mr. Sterling. Change can either break us or transform us. The choice is yours." As she ended the call, Sarah looked out at the city skyline. The meeting she had just arranged would bring her face to face with her past, but this time, she would be the one in control. The tables hadn't just turned, they had been completely reset. The board meeting at Lux and Elite had the atmosphere of a funeral. Richard Sterling sat at the head of the table, his usual commanding presence diminished by the gravity of the situation. The quarterly reports projected on the screen behind him told a story of rapid decline. Sales down 60%, foot traffic at historic lows, and mounting debt. "Our options are limited," Gloria Chen, the head of finance, stated, flatly. "We either find a buyer willing to take on our debt, or we begin liquidation proceedings." Her words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Sterling gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. "There must be other alternatives. Our brand still has value." "The brand is the problem," interjected Michael Ross, the youngest board member. "Modern luxury consumers want something different. Look at the Augustine collection. They're redefining the entire market." The mention of his rising competitor made Sterling's jaw clench. "Their approach dilutes what true luxury means. It's a temporary trend." "A trend that's bankrupting us," Gloria countered. "Mr. Sterling, we need to face reality. The market has changed and we haven't changed with it." Meanwhile, across town, Sarah sat in a sleek conference room at the Augustine collection, reviewing expansion plans with Elizabeth and their executive team. The success of their first location had attracted attention from investors worldwide. "Dubai wants us to open a flagship store in the fashion district," Elizabeth announced, spreading out the proposal. "And we have similar offers from London and Paris." Sarah studied the documents, but her mind was elsewhere. She had seen the news about Lux and Elite's troubles. The store's impending collapse should have felt like vindication, but instead, it sparked an idea. "What if we considered a different kind of expansion?" she asked suddenly. "One that could change more than just our bottom line." Back at Lux and Elite, Sterling sat alone in his office after the board meeting, staring at his reflection in the window. His phone buzzed with messages from creditors, but he ignored them. The board had given him 1 week to find a solution before they moved forward with liquidation. His computer dinged with an email notification. Opening it, he found a message from an unexpected source, the Augustine collection. They were interested in discussing a potential business opportunity. Sterling's first instinct was to delete the message. But as he reached for the mouse, his eyes caught sight of the signature line, Sarah Martinez, Chief Strategy Officer. The name tugged at his memory again, stronger this time, but still frustratingly out of reach. That evening, Sarah walked through the quiet halls of her office building, considering the bold move she was about to make. The plan she had developed went beyond business strategy. It was about creating real change in an industry that had long thrived on exclusion. "Are you sure about this?" Elizabeth had asked earlier when Sarah shared her idea. After everything that happened, Sarah's response had been simple. Sometimes the best way to change a system is from within. She picked up her phone and dialed the number she'd obtained from her contacts. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered, older, more strained, but still carrying that note of authority. "Mr. Sterling, this is Sarah Martinez from the Augustine collection. I believe it's time we met to discuss the future of luxury retail." There was a pause on the line, heavy with unspoken history. Sterling cleared his throat. "Yes, of course. Though I must admit I'm surprised by your interest in Lux and Elite. The landscape of luxury is changing, Mr. Sterling. Change can either break us or transform us. The choice is yours." As she ended the call, Sarah looked out at the city skyline. The meeting she had just arranged would bring her face to face with her past, but this time she would be the one in control. The tables hadn't just turned, they had been completely reset. The private dining room at Essence buzzed with anticipation. Sarah had chosen this location carefully, neutral ground, but on her terms. The restaurant's subtle elegance was a stark contrast to the ostentatious luxury Sterling was accustomed to, yet its refinement was undeniable. She arrived early, taking a moment to ensure everything was perfect. The table settings gleamed, the lighting was just right, and the private sommelier was briefed on Sterling's known preferences. Sarah smoothed her tailored navy suit, designer, but understated, and checked her reflection in the window. The nervous young woman from 5 years ago was nowhere to be seen. Richard Sterling arrived precisely on time, his entrance lacking the commanding presence she remembered. His designer suit, while immaculate, seemed to hang slightly loose on his frame, and new lines creased his face. He paused in the doorway, taking in the room's atmosphere with an appraising eye. "Mr. Sterling," Sarah rose to greet him, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming." "Ms. Martinez." His handshake was firm but cautious. "I must admit, I'm curious about your proposition. The Augustine Collection's interest in luxe and elite is unexpected." They settled into their seats as the sommelier approached with a bottle of Bordeaux. Sterling's preferred vintage, Sarah knew from her research. She watched as he tasted the wine, noting his subtle nod of approval. "You've done your homework," he commented, setting down his glass. "I always do," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "Just as I'm sure you've researched me." Sterling's expression flickered. "Your rise in the industry has been remarkable, though I can't help feeling we've met before." Sarah met his gaze directly. "We have, Mr. Sterling, 5 years ago at your store. You had me removed for daring to shop there." The color drained from Sterling's face as recognition finally dawned. The wine glass in his hand trembled slightly before he set it down. I remember now." "Good," Sarah said calmly, "because understanding our past is crucial to discussing our future." The first course arrived, a masterpiece of modern cuisine that represented Essence's philosophy of accessible excellence. Sterling stared at his plate, clearly struggling to maintain his composure. "If this is about revenge," he began. But Sarah cut him off with a sharp laugh. "Revenge? Mr. Sterling, if I wanted revenge, I would simply wait a few months and watch Luxe and Elite collapse. This meeting is about something far more important." She pulled out a tablet and brought up a presentation. "The luxury market is evolving. The next generation of wealthy consumers doesn't want just expensive products. They want meaningful experiences, ethical practices, and inclusive environments. The Augustine Collection understood this from the beginning. Luxe and Elite can adapt, or it can disappear." Sterling's jaw tightened. "And you're offering to help with this adaptation?" "I'm offering a partnership," Sarah explained, sliding a document across the table. "The Augustine Collection would acquire a controlling interest in Luxe and Elite, but you would retain a position on the board. Your experience and connections, combined with our modern approach, could transform both businesses." "You want me to work for you?" Sterling's voice carried a mix of disbelief and wounded pride. "I want you to work with us," Sarah corrected. "Your understanding of traditional luxury retail is valuable, Mr. Sterling, but it needs to be paired with a vision for the future." The main course arrived, giving Sterling a moment to process her words. Sarah watched as he struggled with the shift in power dynamics, with the realization that the woman he had once dismissed now held his fate in her hands. "Why?" he finally asked. "Why offer this instead of letting Luxe and Elite fail?" Sarah took a sip of wine, considering her response. "Because true change doesn't come from destroying the old system, but from transforming it. Yes, you humiliated me 5 years ago, but that moment taught me something valuable. The luxury industry doesn't just need new players, it needs a new philosophy." Sterling studied the proposal, his expression unreadable. "And if I refuse, then Luxe and Elite will likely close within months, and the Augustine Collection will expand into your market space anyway. The choice is yours, Mr. Sterling, but consider this. Sometimes our greatest failures can lead to our most meaningful successes if we're willing to learn from them." The weight of the moment hung between them as Sterling looked around the restaurant, taking in its subtle sophistication. In every detail, he could see the future of luxury that Sarah had envisioned. Elegant but welcoming, exclusive but not exclusionary. The news of the partnership between the Augustine Collection and Luxe and Elite sent shockwaves through the luxury retail world. Business magazines scrambled to analyze the unexpected merger, while industry insiders debated its implications. For Sarah and Sterling, however, the real work was just beginning. The first joint board meeting set the tone for the changes to come. Sterling sat at his usual place at the head of the table, but now Sarah occupied the seat to his right. The contrast between them was striking, his traditional approach to luxury meeting her innovative vision. "The renovation plans are ambitious," Sterling commented, reviewing the blueprints for Luxe and Elite's transformation. The store would remain open during the changes, symbolizing the gradual evolution they hoped to achieve. "We're not just changing the space," Sarah explained to the combined board. "We're changing the entire shopping experience." Her presentation detailed how each element, from the layout to the staff training, would reflect their new philosophy, curve-inclusive luxury. The transformation began with the staff. Many of Sterling's longtime employees struggled with the new approach, including Marcus, his faithful assistant. Sarah watched as Sterling himself led a training session, his voice carrying a new kind of authority. "The essence of luxury isn't in making people feel unworthy," he told his staff, catching Sarah's eye as he spoke. "It's in making them feel exceptional." The words seemed to cost him something, but they rang true. The physical renovation proceeded in stages. The cold marble floors were warmed with elegant rugs, and the harsh lighting was replaced with a softer, more inviting ambience. Display cases were redesigned to be both secure and accessible, allowing customers to interact more naturally with the products. Sterling found himself drawn into the details of the transformation, his expertise in traditional luxury becoming an unexpected asset. He suggested subtle refinements to Sarah's plans, ways to maintain exclusivity while removing exclusion. To his surprise, she listened, incorporating his ideas when they aligned with the greater vision. "You're adapting better than I expected," Sarah observed one evening as they reviewed the day's progress. The store had just closed, and the sound of construction work echoed from the back. Sterling straightened a display that had been slightly askew. "Perhaps I needed this wake-up call, though I doubt you expected to be the one delivering it." Sarah smiled, remembering their first encounter. "Life has a way of coming full circle, Mr. Sterling. The question is whether we learn from the journey." The impact of their changes became evident as new customers began to mix with Luxe and Elite's traditional clientele. A young tech entrepreneur purchased her first luxury handbag, guided by a sales associate who took genuine pleasure in helping her select the perfect piece. An elderly gentleman found himself in conversation with a group of fashion students, sharing stories about the evolution of style. Sterling observed these interactions with growing fascination. The store's revenue was not only recovering, but surpassing its previous peaks. More importantly, the atmosphere had transformed. The tension that had once permeated the space was gone, replaced by an energy that felt both exclusive and welcoming. One afternoon, a familiar face appeared in the store. Eleanor, Sarah's sister, now a successful professional in her own right. Sterling watched as Sarah excused herself from a meeting to greet her, noting the silver bracelet that gleamed on Elena's wrist, similar to the one that had sparked their original encounter. "Your sister's success is remarkable," Sterling commented later after Elena had left, though perhaps not surprising given the example she had to follow. Sarah studied him for a moment. "We all have the capacity to change, Mr. Sterling. Sometimes we just need the right motivation." The transformation of Luxe and Elite became a case study in modern luxury retail. Industry publications praised the seamless blend of traditional excellence and contemporary inclusivity. But for Sarah and Sterling, the true measure of success wasn't in the press coverage or profits. It was in the small moments of connection that happened every day on the store floor. As the final phase of renovation neared completion, Sarah stood in the center of the store, taking in the results of their collaboration. The space still exuded luxury, but it was a luxury that invited rather than intimidated. Sterling joined her, his posture more relaxed than she had ever seen it. "We've created something unique here," he acknowledged, "something I wouldn't have thought possible 5 years ago." Sometimes the best vision comes from seeing through someone else's eyes, Sarah replied, thinking of how far they had both come. "The real luxury is in growing beyond who we used to be." The International Luxury Retail Conference in Milan buzzed with anticipation as Sarah Martinez took the stage. The audience, composed of industry leaders from around the world, had gathered to hear about the revolutionary partnership that had transformed Luxe and Elite from a failing traditionalist boutique into a beacon of modern luxury retail. Richard Sterling sat in the front row, a position that once would have felt natural to him, but now carried a different meaning. He watched as Sarah commanded the room with quiet confidence, her presentation weaving together data and personal experience to tell their story of transformation. "The future of luxury isn't about creating barriers," Sarah explained, gesturing to the slides behind her. "It's about creating connections. Our success at Luxe and Elite proves that exclusivity and inclusivity aren't mutually exclusive. They're complementary forces that, when balanced properly, create something extraordinary." The graphs and charts told a compelling story. Customer satisfaction up by 200%, sales increased by 150%, and most importantly, a demographic spread that showed they had managed to attract new customers without alienating their traditional clientele. In the audience, Elizabeth Augustine smiled knowingly. The partnership she had helped forge between Sarah and Sterling had exceeded even her optimistic expectations. The Augustine Collection's approach to luxury retail was no longer seen as revolutionary. It was becoming the new standard. During the Q&A session, a young entrepreneur raised her hand. "Ms. Martinez, how do you respond to critics who say that making luxury more accessible diminishes its value?" Sarah's eyes met Sterling's for a brief moment before she answered. "True. Luxury isn't diminished by being accessible. It's enhanced by being appreciated. Our experience shows that when you remove artificial barriers, you don't lose exclusivity, you gain authenticity." Sterling found himself nodding in agreement, remembering his own journey from skeptic to believer. The lessons he had learned went beyond business strategy. They had transformed his understanding of value itself. After the conference, Sarah and Sterling walked through Milan's fashion district, their conversation flowing easily despite their history. The elegant storefronts around them displayed a mix of traditional and modern luxury, much like their own transformed space back home. "The Dubai expansion is proceeding ahead of schedule," Sarah mentioned, checking her phone. "The local team has fully embraced our vision." Sterling adjusted his tie, a habit that now seemed more contemplative than nervous. "I never expected to be excited about change at this stage in my career, but here we are." They stopped at a small cafe, its blend of historic architecture and contemporary design reflecting their own philosophy of harmonizing old and new. As they settled at a table, Sarah pulled out a tablet with preliminary designs for their next project. "The London location will be our biggest challenge yet," she explained, showing him the plans. "The market there is deeply rooted in traditional luxury." Sterling studied the designs with an expert eye. "Perhaps that's exactly why it needs our approach. I see several opportunities here." He began marking the plans, adding suggestions that balanced tradition with innovation. Their collaboration had evolved into a genuine partnership, each bringing their unique perspective to their shared vision. Sterling's decades of experience in traditional luxury retail complemented Sarah's innovative approach, creating something neither could have achieved alone. As the sun set over Milan's historic skyline, they discussed the future of their industry. The transformation of Luxe and Elite had sparked a movement, inspiring other luxury retailers to reconsider their approach. Their success had proven that change wasn't just possible, it was essential for survival in the modern luxury market. "We're receiving more partnership requests than we can handle," Sarah noted, scrolling through her emails. "Everyone wants to know our secret." Sterling smiled, a genuine warmth replacing his once practiced corporate expression. "The secret is that there is no secret. It's about having the courage to challenge our own assumptions." Their evening concluded with a walk back to their hotel, the streets of Milan alive with the energy of Fashion Week. Young designers mingled with established houses, street style, influenced haute couture, and the barriers between different worlds continued to blur. "Did you ever imagine this outcome?" Sterling asked as they reached the hotel lobby. "When you first walked into my store 5 years ago?" Sarah paused, considering the question. "I imagined changing the luxury retail world," she admitted. "I just didn't expect you to be such an important part of that change." As they parted ways for the evening, both reflected on how far they had come. Their story had become more than a business success. It was a testament to the power of transformation, both personal and professional. The Highland Mall had changed dramatically in the 5 years since Sarah's humiliation at Luxe and Elite. The transformed store now anchored a renaissance throughout the shopping center, inspiring other retailers to evolve their approaches to customer service and accessibility. Sarah stood in the exact spot where her journey had begun, now preparing for a very different kind of event. The store was closed for the evening, transformed for a special celebration, marking the successful completion of their international expansion. "Everything is ready," Elizabeth reported, checking the final details. The guest list included industry leaders, fashion journalists, and most importantly, a diverse group of customers who had become part of the store's new community. Sterling emerged from his office, now located adjacent to Sarah's. His role had evolved from owner to mentor, sharing his decades of experience while embracing new perspectives. The Paris team just confirmed their first month's numbers exceeded projections by 40%. The celebration began as the sun set, the store's new lighting casting a warm glow over the gathered crowd. Young entrepreneurs mingled with established business leaders, while fashion students engaged in animated discussions with veteran designers. Eleanor arrived wearing the silver bracelet that had once been out of reach, now a symbol of how far they had all come. "Remember when you couldn't even get past the door?" she whispered to Sarah, squeezing her hand. Sterling overheard the exchange as he approached. "If I could change that day," he began, but Sarah shook her head. "That day changed everything," she replied. "Sometimes we need to hit bottom before we can truly rise." The evening's centerpiece was the announcement of their newest initiative, a mentorship program designed to support emerging entrepreneurs from underprivileged backgrounds. Sterling had surprised everyone by offering to lead the program personally. "My greatest regret," he addressed the crowd, "was believing that luxury was about exclusion. Thanks to Sarah Martinez, I learned that true luxury is about elevation, lifting people up rather than keeping them out." Sarah took the podium next, her presence commanding yet approachable. "5 years ago, I stood outside these doors, feeling worthless because of what I couldn't afford. Today, we're not just selling luxury items, we're selling the belief that everyone deserves to feel exceptional." The applause that followed wasn't just for their business success, it was for the transformation they represented. The security guard who had once escorted Sarah out now welcomed guests with genuine warmth. The sales associates who had snickered behind their hands were replaced by a diverse team trained to make every customer feel valued. Later that evening, Sarah found herself alone in the store's private showroom, where the silver bracelet that started everything was now displayed as part of their heritage collection. Sterling joined her, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. "I've been thinking," he said, passing her a glass, "about what you said when we first discussed the partnership, that sometimes our greatest failures lead to our most meaningful successes." Sarah turned to face him. "And you could have chosen revenge. Instead, you chose transformation, not just of the business, but of people, including me." Through the windows, they could see the city lights reflecting off the store's new facade. The name Luxe and Elite remained, but below it a new tagline read, "Where luxury meets humanity." "We all have moments that define us," Sarah reflected. "It's what we do with those moments that matters." A young woman caught Sarah's attention through the showroom window. She was peering hesitantly at the displays, dressed simply but with evident care. Sarah recognized that look, the mixture of longing and uncertainty she had once felt herself. Without hesitation, she moved toward the door. Sterling watched her go, understanding in his eyes. The store was technically closed, but some traditions were meant to be broken. As Sarah opened the door and welcomed the surprised woman inside, Sterling smiled, knowing that their story of transformation had come full circle. 1 year later, Sarah stood at the podium of Harvard Business School, preparing to deliver a guest lecture on transformative business practices. The auditorium was packed with students eager to learn from the woman who had revolutionized the luxury retail industry. "Success isn't just about profits," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "It's about creating value that extends beyond the bottom line." Behind her, slides showed the evolution of Luxe and Elite, from its days as an exclusionary boutique to its current status as a global leader in inclusive luxury. In the front row, Richard Sterling sat with perfect posture, now a regular guest. Speaker in Sarah's series on ethical business transformation. His silver hair and impeccable suit remained unchanged, but his eyes held a warmth that would have been unthinkable 6 years ago. The true measure of luxury isn't in its price tag, Sarah continued, but in how it makes people feel. When we removed the barriers of intimidation and judgment, we didn't just change a business model, we changed lives. The presentation included case studies from their mentorship program, which had already launched successful careers for dozens of young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. Sterling's involvement had been instrumental, his experience proving invaluable in guiding the next generation. After the lecture, a student approached Sarah with a familiar hesitancy in her step. "Ms. Martinez, I grew up in a neighborhood where luxury stores were like foreign countries. Your story, it gives me hope that I can succeed too." Sarah smiled, remembering her own journey. "The doors that seem closed today might be the ones you open for others tomorrow." Later that evening, Sarah and Sterling walked through the campus grounds, their conversation turning to the future. The Augustine Collection and Lux and Elite had become more than just successful businesses. They were pioneers of a new philosophy that was reshaping the entire industry. The London School wants to create a scholarship in your name, Sterling mentioned, for students focusing on ethical business practices. Sarah paused by a campus fountain, its waters reflecting the setting sun. "Our legacy isn't just about what we built," she reflected. "It's about what we inspired others to build." Their partnership had evolved into a friendship neither could have imagined. Sterling had become a champion for change in the luxury industry, using his connections and experience to support initiatives that would have once seemed beneath him. "You know," he said, adjusting his tie in a gesture that had become more habitual, than necessary. "When you first proposed our partnership, I thought you were offering me a chance to save my business, but you were really offering me a chance to save myself." Sarah thought about the upcoming graduation ceremony at their mentorship program. The first class was preparing to launch their own ventures, each carrying forward the principles of inclusive excellence they had learned. "We all need someone to believe in us," she replied, especially when we don't believe in ourselves." They reached the business school's main entrance, where a banner announced the upcoming Global Retail Innovation Summit. Sarah and Sterling were scheduled to deliver the keynote address together, sharing their story of transformation with industry leaders from around the world. "The next generation won't have to fight the battles we did," Sarah observed, watching students stream past them with dreams and ambitions of their own. Sterling nodded, his expression thoughtful. "They'll fight new ones, but they'll do it with different weapons: empathy, inclusion, innovation." As they prepared to leave the campus, Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from Elena. The latest expansion of their mentorship program had received full funding, ensuring its continuation for years to come. "You know what the best part is?" Sarah asked, showing Sterling the message. "Every success story from our program creates ripples. Each person who breaks through a barrier holds the door open for others to follow." Sterling smiled, remembering the man he used to be and marveling at how far he had come. "That's the true luxury," he agreed, "creating a legacy that enriches lives rather than bank accounts." They walked together toward their waiting car, the setting sun casting long shadows across the campus. Their story had become more than a business case study. It was a testament to the power of transformation, redemption, and the profound impact of choosing growth over grievance. The future stretched before them, full of new challenges and opportunities. But they faced it with the confidence of those who had learned that the greatest luxury of all was the ability to change, to grow, and to lift others as they climbed.